Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Tomorrow is finally Election Day. If you haven't already voted, tomorrow obviously the last day to do it. We've got good, bad, crazy martinis for you today, and a couple of very quick housekeeping items to start things today. First of all, Jim, no rest for Doris, and I'm guessing Diane either, as we get closer and closer to Election Day. On Sunday, Doris got an email from Barack Obama, which I'm sure she was very excited about. And just like he does in most of his speeches nowadays, Barack's a little bit disappointed in Doris. And the subject line says, "I'm asking for the last time, Doris. We cannot wake up the day after the election wishing we had done more, Doris." Oh, yes, we can. Oh, yes, you can. And then I got one from Kamala right after that saying, "Did you see Barack Obama's email?" So the barrage is never ending. And Jen, there seems like there's a deadline every day now. It's not just the end of the month. It's not the end of the quarter. But, oh, it's Tuesday. We got to have this much by the end of whatever. But anyway, hopefully those end by the end of tomorrow. But the other thing I would mention is that, do you remember back, I think it was mostly in the Bush era when he was running, George W. Bush, that we got this concept of the Redskins rule, that if the Redskins won their last home game before Election Day, the incumbent party would win the presidential election. And if the Redskins lost their last home game before Election Day, the party out of power in the White House would win. Well, it worked in 2000, and it's only worked once since then. So the rule obviously is not ironclad. The football results don't portend the results of the election. But, Jim, think about this. If it were in effect, think about how the Redskins played in their last home game, winning on the tipped Hail Mary at the end. And if that's the way the election unfolds, that would be very awkward and not fun for a lot of people. So,
yeah, that sounds like
you're looking at it the day before.
Yeah, we're headed to a 270, 268 finish with, one guy wins the Electoral College, the other guy wins the popular vote. First of all, listeners, I think we should give credit where it's due. Isn't it safe to say now that Greg Columbus does the best impression of Barack Obama this side of Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania? Who, if anyone's listened to him, Josh Shapiro isn't trying to do an Obama impression, or maybe he is, but he just does it in a way. So my only update for Diane is that the spammers that have reached out to her decided to start touting Dan Osborne, which is a remarkable ability to get. The person who annoys me the most, because for those who we've discussed in previous episodes, Democrats have been saying for a while, Deb Fischer's in trouble. I don't think that's really a very plausible case. It's all been internal polls that he's commissioned and released. Her polls look better, and the independent polls put her up. Not by a ton, but less than Trump, but it's a pretty darn red state. So no, I'm not going to donate to Dan Osborne, nor am I going to commit to vote for him. For several reasons, but among them, I don't live in Nebraska. Neither does Diane. Why are, and then finally, that weird omen, that weird kind of indicator of how the presidential race is going to shake out, Greg, maybe it only works for the word Redskins. Maybe once they became the Commanders, the magic was broken. So
could be. Yeah, they came up with this observation right before the 2000 election. And then they made some sort of corollary about the popular vote. And once you're tweaking these odd, bizarre twists of fate, it's not fun anymore. And so it kind of fell apart after that.
It works the other way. On Tuesdays, when a Republican candidate wins the election, the following Sunday, the Jets will lose. But on Tuesdays, when the Democratic wins the election, the Jets will lose. So it's remarkably effective that way.
What about when the Jets win on a Thursday before the election?
We're going to learn. We're going to see. I honestly, I don't think they've ever had, they obviously only play a Thursday game once a year, and you very rarely play a Thursday game right before the election. So we'll see. We are starting a new ironclad omen this cycle. Don't know what it's going to be, but whatever it is, it'll always work out this way.
Everybody's trying to figure out an angle on this, but honestly, I don't think anybody really knows how it's going to play out. But let's go to how the Democrats are reacting to some of the early vote numbers, because Katie Pavlich over at Town Hall says they're kind of freaking out about this. And whenever Democrats are freaking out, particularly publicly, either A, they're worried, B, they're trying to gin up more voter intensity on their own side, or potentially both. But they highlight a couple of things. First of all, as we have, John Ralston highlighting the Nevada numbers, where the Republican landslide in the rural areas is still overcoming what's happening in the Vegas area, but there's obviously still a long way to go. And then they also take a look at some other states where Republicans are ahead, and certainly all states where they're doing much better in the early vote than they did in previous cycles, because Trump and others were discouraging them from doing that. They wanted to swamp the vote on Election Day, which didn't turn out too well. But they've got a big lead in the early vote in Arizona. They've got more than 100,000 lead in Georgia. They're down in Michigan by quite a bit, actually. But in Pennsylvania, they're down quite a bit. And Wisconsin, they're also down. But again, there's a lot of others, independents. So you don't know state to state how that's going to swing, whether they're focused on the economy, whether they're focused on recent comments, what they're focused on. So we've mentioned this both ways, Jim. Republicans clearly beating expectations in places like Arizona and Nevada. On the other hand, they're trailing in some of these other key battleground states, which, if they're only spreading out the vote they otherwise would have gotten on Election Day anyway, is a big problem. But if they're getting more people to the polls and still getting a decent surge on Election Day, it'll definitely work to their advantage.
Yeah, so kind of taking them in order, I think Republicans have good reason to feel good about all of the Sunbelt states. John Ralston, as of this recording, has not put out his final predictions and all that stuff, but one of two things are going to happen. Trump is going to win Nevada, and we're going to say, wow, look at that early vote turnout. It was fantastic, and that clearly was a huge advantage. Or Harris will win, and we will just believe that the Harry Reid machine can always find enough votes wherever they need to. Because I don't know if I've seen the last update, but it was something in the neighborhood of like 40,000 more registered Republicans have voted than registered Democrats. That's a nice advantage. You'd much rather have that the other way around. No, a registered Republican is not guaranteed to vote for Trump. A registered Democrat is not guaranteed to vote for Harris. But, we're talking upward of 90% vote for the party, the nominee of the party they're registered with. Similarly, I wrote a short corner post earlier. Arizona, I'm not even sure it really should be a swing state anymore. It's been a long time since you've seen Harris leading a poll, and Republicans have a nice lead in the early vote there. North Carolina and Georgia also still looking pretty good. Not great, not phenomenal. But you figure Republicans are in the neighborhood of where they want to be. And on the swing state, I'll just focus on Pennsylvania, since I feel like that's the one that comes down to. We just taped that other podcast I appear on, and I picked Trump to win Pennsylvania. That one is more gut than numbers. This past weekend, I guess it was on Saturday, I put out, I just put a link to the early voting site run by the University of Florida and the numbers. And I think it was Harris was up by like 450,000 votes. And I pointed out that these are the numbers. Pennsylvania is probably more likely to have some blue-collar, socially conservative, and Trump-friendly Democrats than your typical state. But I don't know how much you want to bet on that. I got everybody and their brother jumping on me, saying you're totally wrong. You're trying to depress Republicans. All I did was put up the link and the numbers. Like that. A lot of people could say they could see me smirking as I posted that. You can't see me unless Twitter's like a lot more like the NSA than we think it is. But just want to observe that, so people point out, well, yeah, but this is way better than it was in 2020. And Trump almost won the state of Pennsylvania. So if he's doing considerably better than, and we're talking like 500,000 to 1 million votes in that margin, then clearly Trump's doing better this time around. That's logical. I will just make two kind of quibbles or two other kind of pieces of counter evidence. Republicans are putting a lot more effort into early votes in Pennsylvania and everywhere else across the country this time. So you'd think they'd be doing better in the early vote. And similarly, there's no pandemic. And I have a feeling a lot of people were voting in 2020 absentee or early voting because they didn't want to be in a polling place, particularly Democrats. Democrats were much more serious about social distancing than Republicans were. Again, I think Trump is going to win Pennsylvania, but you can tell by the tone of my voice, I'm not, robustly confident about that. It assumes that he's going to, first, I have a hard time saying we're only down in the early vote by 450,000 votes. It's good news. I have a hard time believing that really is good news. I really would rather not be. And then secondly, Trump won 2/3 of the vote on the election day in Pennsylvania last time around. Can he do that again this time? If he does, yeah, then he's got it. It'll win by a comfortable margin. If he can't, and again, I figure there's fewer Democrats who are voting absentee this cycle, then it's probably going to be a very close one. So I don't know, again, I'm picking Trump, but that's more gut than numbers right now. But anyway, Trump needs one of the blue wall states to fall into his pile, and you probably feel pretty decent about odds about that. No worse than 50-50 right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. The pollsters seem to have a herd mentality. Nate Silver's been talking about that lately, that they're all kind of coming to the same conclusion that everything's a 1-point race. There was one outfit that literally had the exact same margin, a 1-point margin, 48-47. I think it was in Trump's favor, but at that point, it doesn't really matter in the margin of error in all 7 battleground states. So everybody's kind of hedging their bets. Nobody wants to kind of be the outlier, except apparently the poll in Iowa, which has Harris ahead by 3, which is weird. But we'll see.
We should just throw in a thought on that. And if it were any other pollster in any other state, we'd probably just dismiss it as a crazy outlier. Ann Stelzer's been polling Iowa for a long time. She's pretty well respected. People keep saying she's the gold standard. Now, I don't know why we should be putting our currency on Ann Stelzer. Nonetheless, fine. But the point is, she's been doing this for a long time, and people have this instinctive sense that she can detect things. Yeah, Trump's not going to lose Iowa. I think we'd basically say, oh, come on. I think what's a little more unnerving is Iowa going to be closer? And is that, because the demographics of Iowa are kind of similar to Wisconsin, kind of similar to Michigan, is that a sign of weakness or something? Even though I don't think that's an accurate poll, and I think she's going to get some mockery after this. She's not hurting, and I kind of want to give credit for that. You're putting out a number that people are going to say, really, be very doubtful about, but that's not adjusting the numbers because you're afraid of going out too far out on a limb. She's way out on a limb, but, credit for, having the courage to do that.
Yeah, not going with the herd mentality. So we'll find out. Hopefully by the Wednesday 3 Martini Lunch. But previous cycles, not giving us a ton of hope for that. Jim, I'm always reminded by the comments that Mark Halperin made a couple weeks back that if Trump wins, we're going to see the biggest mental health crisis in the history of this country. Today's episode of the 3 Martini Lunch is brought to you by BetterHelp. And so if you do need help, whether it's dealing with the realities of politics or the anxiety over politics or just whatever's going on at work in your life and any other aspect of day-to-day living, try BetterHelp. It's, first of all, professional. All therapists are licensed, accredited professionals, and BetterHelp allows you to connect with them in a safe and convenient online environment. It's affordable. Just pay a low, flat fee for both live sessions as well as messaging with your therapist. And it's convenient. Do it at your own time, your own pace. Communicate with your therapist as often as you want and whenever you feel that it is needed. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/3ML today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Jim, let's go to our bad martini now. And this is the subject of a lot of your morning jolt today. And that's the situation with mail-in ballots. They used to be called absentee ballots. I don't know why we changed the lexicon on that. But nonetheless, as you mentioned a moment ago, in 2020, there were a lot more. Some of the states changed the rules, some of them without the legislature getting involved. But nonetheless, there was a big avalanche then. Should be fewer than that now, given all the early voting and the fact that we're not in a pandemic. But as you chronicle today in the Jolt, and we mentioned briefly that story out in Washington State last week where a lady got 16 absentee ballots, the actual ballots for people who had allegedly once lived in her apartment. There's more stories like this about questions about absentee ballots, some that were stolen, and in one case where a dead person was voting that you chronicle. Some genius in Fresno left the key to the drop box in the lock. It doesn't appear anybody stole it, but come on, people. But the biggest one I think you mentioned is that people in Pennsylvania, not that that state's going to matter at all this election cycle, right? Erie County, Pennsylvania, as many as 17,000 people might not get their ballots on time. Again, simple blocking and tackling here, and it seems like some places just can't do it.
Yes. So first of all, those who've been paying very close attention this year have probably noticed that the Monday morning jolt is longer than the others during the week. And this is because often the idea comes to me on Sunday. So I start digging into it and can go into greater length. And my fantastic editor, Sarah Schutte, I make her life miserable every Monday morning by sending off a really long one that needs to be edited a lot. Nonetheless, this one, I started out actually the Michigan case of that Chinese foreign student at the University of Michigan who was now charged with a crime, who cast a ballot, was not legally eligible to cast a ballot, but because it's now in there, they can't fish it out. There's nothing tying this person to their vote, which is why this is really significant, is that, Democrats say, oh, illegal, non-citizens never cast ballot. Wrong. We don't see huge numbers, but we know about at least. But in this case, it happened, and I think a lot of our listeners probably heard that. They may not have heard the same thing happened in Colorado, where somebody stole a bunch of mail ballots, filled them out. I think it was about a dozen. The good news is they caught 9. The bad news is that 3 got through and are already counted in as votes. And once again, they can't fish out who the fraudulent vote was. So right now we know of 4. Right now, you could say Colorado, it's a pretty blue state. It's not going to make any difference. Well, first of all, and I go through the list, every cycle we get at least one race. It's not always the presidential level. Presidential race margins are usually like in the thousands of votes, if not the tens of thousands of votes. But, we all remember Florida 2000. And then you have Senate races, gubernatorial races. I had traumatic flashbacks talking about Dino Rossi. Right, I could just see everybody in our audience is just, grabbing their sides of their heads right now. Al Franken against Norm Coleman in 2008. But even more recently, there was an Iowa House race just last cycle, came down to 6 votes. And then rather infamously here in Virginia, there was a state House of Delegates race that came out to a tie. And they picked a name out of a hat, right? So when you say, it's not a big problem, well, like 1 to 3 might actually make a difference in some of these races, right? And even if they don't, your vote as a legitimate U.S. citizen gets watered down by every non-citizen vote that slips through the system, right? So I'm not saying you get tens of millions. I am not your crazy Aunt Edna on Facebook who's claiming that Biden sold the state of Nebraska to the Chinese and that there are tens of millions of illegal votes being cast. But it happens. And I think we should aim for as close to 0 as possible. And each time you do find a case, you're like, well, how do we know that it has, it doesn't, these are just the cases we found. In the case of this University of Michigan student, he went back and asked for his ballot back. He got cold feet. He realized he'd broken the law. Now, I don't want to take away from the clerk. I don't want to take away from law enforcement. I just want to point out, when they come back and admit it, that probably makes it easier to catch. Right? You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes or Columbo or any great, detective to figure this one out. And then there's the case of ballots that are lost or stolen or destroyed. People probably heard about the 2 drop boxes that had incendiary, fires put in them. Yeah. So the good news, in one of them, they think that only 3 were damaged. They've reached out to those voters. They're going to give them a substitute ballot. They're not going to count the damaged ones. Should be okay. In the other one, there are 6 that are destroyed so badly they can't identify who they were for. And so there's no way, can't identify who they were. And they also said there might have been some that were burned to ash. So they don't really know how many got destroyed. And I look at that and I'm like, by the way, look, it's Oregon. It's a very democratic state. It's a very democratic place. But that doesn't matter. I don't want anybody's ballot destroyed, left, right, or center, or lunatic anarchist. And we now, what do you do in that situation? Do you tell everybody maybe your ballot was destroyed? This is a serious one, a serious problem. Then I just got to listen. I simply went through Googling news sites. Ballots destroyed, ballots lost, ballots stolen. A lot of mail gets stolen out there. Now, it's probably just people who are looking for checks or for money, but they're also grabbing ballots. People have found piles of mail in the woods, including ballots. And as you mentioned, the case of both Pennsylvania and in Cobb County, Georgia. Hey, are these important states this election cycle? Both of them have ones where people applied for an absentee ballot and they haven't gotten it in the mail. Now, the good news is judges have said, hey, if you haven't gotten it, you are allowed to vote in person. We're not going to, consider that you're trying to vote twice or something, which is good. But I'm also recognizing these people requested absentee ballots for a reason. Maybe they got travel plans. Maybe they got something else that's going to have them unable to vote on that day. So they're, these people either have to cancel their plans or they're not voting. And we're talking about thousands of votes in these 2 very important states. The whole point of this is not to say, the election's being stolen and all that kind of stuff. But it does say these things that the Republicans complain about. Non-citizens voting, ballots being stolen, fraudulent votes being counted. They all happen. Not in major numbers. Probably not in numbers big enough to alter the outcome of an election. Unless you get one of those really close ones. And then you just don't know. So anyway, I just wanted to shine as much light on it as possible. I was surprised how much I found. Really kind of disturbing how often people are finding their mailboxes have been broken into and they had an absentee ballot and it hasn't arrived on time. So look, the good news in America is your vote will probably count and you'll probably be fine. And aren't we all proud?
All right, I've got good, bad, good reaction to this. I think the last part's good. Good, first of all, Sarah Schute's awesome. She was a Radio America intern before she came to National Review, and she's a rock star. Secondly, just mentioning the Dino Rossi, Christine Gregoire, and Norm Coleman, Al Franken just gives me the hives. Very shady. I'll just leave it at that. And but here's the solution. You know, I'm not a big fan of early voting, but at least when you go to early voting, the process looks like it does on Election Day. You've got people there, at least when I go, they tell you exactly how to do the ballot. It's just like on Election Day. So the more we do that, the less I think people should be doing absentee ballots, just because of the possibility of things like what we've just been discussing for the last several minutes happening. The chances of election security or people not getting their ballots are zero when you do that. So if we're going to do early voting, I think you basically need to be an invalid in order to keep doing absentee voting. If you're going to be autumning in Mallorca, push it off till after you can get to early voting or whatever. But if we're going to have elections with different options, we want it to be as secure as possible. And it seems like that's a smarter direction to go than resulting in the mail. We had one listener after the Washington State story last week who said, you know what a ballot drop box is usually called? A mailbox. But as you mentioned in Arizona, that wasn't safe either. So either give it to your letter carrier or take it to the actual post office. But in the end, I think showing up in person, which most people can do, is the best way to go.
By the way, I want to reassure everyone, the guy who light a piece of paper on fire and put it in a mailbox out in Arizona, it was determined that he did not do it for political reasons. So he's a nonpartisan arsonist. He doesn't take sides. He just wants to burn things. And so I think that's something we can all be glad that, after so much partisan division, he's someone who wants to unite all of us in fire. And so there's that thought. Yeah, my thought on drop boxes is they should be indoors. Indoors and at night should be locked, alarms, cameras, all that kind of stuff if you're going to have them, having them in the middle of the parking lot just seems like almost an attractive nuisance, putting temptation out there. And then finally, a lot of Western states love vote by mail. And I think this is a demonstration of the flaws of this, in that the longer you have ballots floating out there, the more opportunities you have for somebody stealing them getting lost. One of the cases, apparently some guy who was a contractor for the U.S. Postal Service in Florida just got tired of his route and dumped the pile in the woods, and somebody came across it, and there was one ballot in there. I think it was like an absentee ballot. It was not a completed ballot, but nonetheless, you never know when some idiot is going to strike. So this is why you want to minimize the amount of time that ballots are floating around out there. So ideally, you could go to in the end, I might like to substitute absentee, mail-in balloting for early voting. Because at least there, the ballot is always in the polling place. You fill it out, you hand it over, you put it into the machine, or you hand it over to the election worker, and it's always in the system. It's never floating around out there where somebody with bad intentions could lose it, steal it, burn it, etc.
And in most cases, you have weeks to do it, so going by absentee is not usually necessary. Florida man apparently works for the U.S. Postal Service down there, so... Depending on how election night goes, the rest of the week, you might be having a few more adult beverages than usual. But if you're going to do that, and again, I don't recommend doing it to excess, make sure you take Z-Biotics first. Because if you're going to be having some of those beverages as the results come in, probably more slowly than you would prefer, having Z-Biotics first will make the next morning go a whole lot smoother.
Remember, kids, don't drink to excess. What am I saying? Don't drink it all. And remember, if there's any podcast that reminds you not to drink to excess, it's the 3 Martini Lunch. Z-Biotics, pre-alcohol probiotic drink, is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next morning. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best the following morning.
I've said many times, I've got a Radio America colleague here who knew his limits perfectly. As he got older, those limits didn't hold up so well, so he decided to try Z-Biotics. Now it's just like it was before, wakes up great the next morning. Go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And for that, we go to the Kamala Harris campaign. Molecule of credit, as Jim likes to say, that at least a couple of times now in the past few days, Kamala has held a press availability with reporters. They haven't gone particularly well. We haven't learned anything particularly new. Sometimes the questions are rather sycophantic. Other times she just dodges the issue. And that's the case that happened, I guess this was over the weekend. And the question was simply, how did you vote on Proposition 36 in the state of California, where Kamala Harris used to be Attorney General, U.S. Senator, and that's where she would vote. And Prop 36 basically would increase penalties for repeat offenders of certain theft and drug-related crimes, reclassifying them, particularly for repeat offenders, again, as possible felonies instead of misdemeanors. So that's the premise of the question here, and Harris's response.
Madam Vice President, have you returned the ballot to California, and how did you vote on Prop 36?
So my ballot is on its way to California, and I'm going to trust the system that it will arrive there. And I am not going to talk about the vote on that because, honestly, it's the Sunday before the election, and I don't intend to create an endorsement one way or another around it. So, but I did vote.
It's the Sunday before the election, so I don't want to say how I voted on a referendum on getting tougher on crime. So, Jim, once again, I'm pretty sure I know how she voted. If she had voted for getting tougher on crime, that would have done her more good on the national stage. I don't know that her friends in California would have loved it, but the fact that she won't say it pretty much gives the game away.
Yeah, I want to give credit to the reporter for asking the question. I also want to point out it could be alternately phrased. Did you vote for or against the referendum that would undo a whole bunch of the reforms to the criminal justice system that you supported in the past? You know, do you want to change? Do you recognize that your decisions in the past were dumb, or do you stick by your decisions in the past that were dumb? Obviously, like, here's the thing. Like, there are probably a whole bunch of referendums where she could say, you know, it's a state issue or something, and I just don't feel like it's the sort of thing that a presidential candidate could weigh in on. I mean, again, you're a resident, and but the idea that how many times in the course of this campaign has she said, Greg, I am the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational crime of those who have smuggled people, drugs, and guns, right? Like, I'm a former prosecutor, Kamala Harris, the entire message is, this is a crime fighter, the toughest crime fighter this side of Batman. What does she think about this, referendum on criminal penalties for theft and drug? Nothing to say. I'm not taking an opinion, I have an opinion. I'm just not willing to share it with you, the voters. Again, I don't think this is going to change a lot of votes in the final day of the election, but it's kind of this perfect microcosm of Kamala Harris. Like, it's not just we're told her 2019 positions are no longer operative. We're very rarely seeing her on camera explaining this stuff. And it usually is like, well, you said you wanted to ban fracking back in 2019. And that was back when I was, as a member of the Biden administration, I have not supported it. Great. We know that. Did you change your mind? Do you think it's just politically not, and she goes like, well, I just don't think we need to do it anymore. Okay, but why? Like there's always this, it's like pulling teeth. We're trying to get answers out of it. So the idea that the woman who's running for presidency, based on her experience as a prosecutor, doesn't want to offer her opinion on criminal penalties in the state of California is just chef's kiss. That right up there with the Biden, nothing comes to mind that I would have done differently than he did. If
yes,
Kamala
exactly.
Harris didn't exist, we'd have to invent her.
She did a 180 on half a dozen major issues, yet her values have not changed. And so try to square that circle or circle that square, however the saying goes. I mean, John Kerry's sitting there somewhere going, wow, she flip-flops a lot.
That's good flip-flopping. Actually, Greg, you say, we need to square the circle and we need to circle the square, because the circle goes around, but the square has corners. Like, this is the sort of thing and the Venn diagram involves the circles. But what if the Venn diagram had square? You could get a really good Kamala Harris riff on shapes and how they work and squaring the circle and circling the square.
Indeed. I'm going to say one more thing here. We heard that Arizona is going to take longer than usual because they've got so many ballot initiatives. So I was looking at this Prop 36. Now, I'm happy to learn that they don't actually have 36 ballot initiatives on the ballot, but they do have either 10 or 11, depending on the reports that I've seen. That's a lot of ballot initiatives. You need to kind of shrink that down. Virginia does a good job having usually 1 or 2, 3 maybe at the most.
And aren't they always like, do the widows of those slain in battle ever have to pay taxes again? And I'm always like, nah, you've given enough to this country. You're fine. I guess it's like state taxes and stuff like that.
Property
but it's
taxes,
also like,
yeah.
We needed a state referendum on this one? Really?
Right.
Nobody asked me about the plastic bag thing. I'm getting, nickel and dimed literally every time I go to the store. But do you have an axe to grind against the widows of slave service? No. Give them a new car. Do whatever you want to do with them. Yeah. So.
No, I don't. Yeah, it's all property tax. I'm like, not only do I not want them to have to pay property taxes, let's just not pay property taxes. It's the most regressive tax out there, and if we're going to make up the revenue, there's much smarter and better ways to do it. But on the list of other referenda this year out there, spending $10 billion more on school renovations, $10 billion on climate change. This is raising your taxes with bonds. Make it easier to pass housing funding, banning prison labor, raising the minimum wage, and rent control, of course. So a whole host of liberal ideas slowing up your trip to the ballot box in California. And that's why, among many other reasons, why it takes forever for us to get the results of some close congressional races and other things in California.
We're going to inaugurate Way to Go, California. Way to go.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's not going to be close in California, the presidential level, but some of the down ballot races certainly could be. And just to tell you where the state of California is now, Orange County, California now has a ballot initiative to let non-citizens vote in local elections. So imagine that happening in the 1980s when there was the stronghold of Republican politics.
Look, as we said, California's not going to be competitive. In fact, I believe the Associated Press just called the state for Harris.
They've called it at 11 o'clock, right on the dot, every year since 1992. I don't think there's been a cliffhanger on a statewide race there in a while, other than maybe when Arnold was there, but even his was pretty lopsided. Anyway, Jim, have a good day. We'll do it again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends and family about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Monday. Don't forget to vote tomorrow, Tuesday. And you can also join us tomorrow for the next 3 Martini Lunch.